there, I'm here today to film my April Book of the Month video. The book this month was SSGB by Lynn Dayton, and I was super pumped because I love alternate history and I love World War II, which this book is both of those things. And I can't say I was let down because I still enjoyed the book, but it was definitely not as good as I hoped, or at least I didn't enjoy it as much as I hoped. So the book itself is a pretty basic premise. It's during World War II, except that London surrendered to the Nazis. The Nazis have invaded, they executed Churchill, they've incarcerated the king, and you're following a detective inspector with Scotland Yard, specifically of the murder squad, and he kind of gets pulled into this tale of espionage and like resistance and power struggles because of this specific investigation. And so the premise was incredibly interesting and I was super hooked. With the summary out of the way, I'll move into my likes and dislikes. My first like was the setting overall. I love World War II era stories and I really enjoy alternate history. Although this specific one did feel like it was a tad bit of a reach to get to this situation. Once they explained how the world works, now that this thing's happened, that part was explained really logically, and I felt like there was a lot of good flow and like structure around it, even if I didn't necessarily think that the steps to get to that spot would have happened. The other thing I really liked was the detail into the SS and German military structures, specifically like the hierarchy and some of the people involved in the different aspects of the military and the SS. I felt it was pretty accurate and that their roles didn't change much or at all with this introduction of the Nazis to Britain, which was really cool. And my third like was just the general feel of espionage and intrigue. They did a really good job with it, and I really loved that tone carried through the entire book from start to finish. With that, I'll go to my dislikes. First dislike was the main character, Douglas Archer, is a little flat. He felt a lot more like a plot device than a character, which for me, as someone who really likes well-developed characters, it kind of sucked. And as a result, there were certain things that were like tinged with his point of view. My second dislike was the conversations were kind of stilted. I don't know if this is just a side effect of people speaking their second languages, either English or German, when they speak the other one fluently as their primary language, or if it was just like the hint of espionage that made some of these conversations really stilted. But there's a few that just felt overly scripted and were harder to get through. And finally, my final negative is the pacing. Here, the biggest issue for me was just that the pacing was very offbeat, and I had a very hard time processing some of the stuff that was happening because it was happening at a pace that I didn't think it would happen at. So there was a lot of parts where I thought it would be more fast-paced, and we ended up being very slow and getting dwelt on a lot of things. It was just very odd, and it really impacted my overall enjoyment of the story because it was so off-kilter. Now I'll touch briefly on some of the characters. First, we have our main character, Douglas Archer. He was pretty interesting. I enjoyed him quite a bit. In terms of his general character setup, there were a lot of things there that were set up to really enjoy, but just how the character was written, I felt it was a little bit flat, and that point of view really affected some of the other things that I think would have been a lot more interesting if it was from a different point of view or maybe a third-person narrator. So overall, I felt kind of meh about him. The next important character to kind of mention here is Huth. That is the German kind of soldier scientist he's working under, who he finds out is actually part of something a little bit bigger and a little bit more secretive. Then you have Kellerman, who's his immediate supervisor. He's a German in the military, I believe, not the SS. I can't remember. He's, like I said, he's Archer's immediate supervisor. Seems friendly enough, but Who knows? And the thing I like about these two characters, Huth and Kellerman, to me, they kind of both are examples of stereotypes that you related to the German military and SS. With Huth, you have this extremely uptight, extremely rigid, super driven character, and then with Kellerman, you have somebody who's a lot more fatherly and friendly, but who's almost more manipulative because of this. And then you have Archer's kind of associate. And then you have a bunch of side characters who were pretty interesting, and they did a really good job kind of perpetuating that tone of intrigue and espionage. I really enjoyed the way they supported that so well. I'll do the wrap up kind of for the spoiler-free section here. Overall, I did enjoy this book quite a bit, but I felt it was really tinged by how boring and bland Douglas Archer's point of view was, just because of how it was written. He was a flat character, and that really affected how I perceived what he was doing and how he was interacting with the world. And the other issue was the pacing, and these things were really big for me and my overall enjoyment of the book, because they didn't allow me to get as immersed in a book as I typically want to be. And as such, I was kind of pulled out of the story a little bit because every time those two things kind of collided. But a superb setting, and I really enjoyed the way that was done. And I enjoyed the overall tone of intrigue and espionage, as I've mentioned many times before. And as such, I'm giving this book a 3 out of 5. I did enjoy it. I thought it was good. It just wasn't amazing. And I'm sure part of this was because I was expecting an amazing book based on the premise. Here's your last warning. Anything after this will be spoilery, so if you want to click off, by all means. If you're wanting to hear some of my thoughts on the book and kind of a few book club questions that I like to do in these Book of the Month book club videos, stick around. So I'll start specifically with the book club questions. I'm kind of doing my standard 6 here. The first question is, what was your initial reaction to the book? Even just reading the back, I was super hooked on the idea of it, and within the first chapter, although I was a little disappointed in the main character, I was really, really pumped about the rest of the story and how the plot would play out. Second question, what is your favorite chapter or scene? I think specifically, I really enjoyed the scene where they're playing whist and where they're kind of not sure if they can trust Archer, and he knows he's being left out of the loop. And it's just like the clashing of the personalities, of trust, and how much information Archer knows and how much he thinks or get him to think he knows. And so I felt like the interplay there was really good. The idea of intrigue was really good, and just the feeling that none of the characters are putting all their cards on the table was really awesome. This made the scene awkward but intense, and I really enjoyed the way everything fell together and how that kind of pushed Archer's character and the plot forward. Third question, how do the characters change over the course of the book? And I have to be honest, they really don't. I mean, some of them die, so I guess that's technically a change. Douglas Archer himself doesn't really change that much. There is a little bit of development, but honestly it's so minimal and so in line with what he was at the beginning of the story, it's really not worth mentioning. How did you feel about the ending? Honestly, the ending was probably one of my favorite parts. Definitely worth the read. It was just such a good amount of natural resolution with the resistance, combining with the self-preservation manipulation of some of the characters. It just worked out so brilliantly, because everything was tied up in a neat little bow, but you knew it wasn't like good, and you knew it wasn't amazing and a happy ending. It was just like, this is what happened. Nobody's really happy, except everything's been dealt with. I'll move on to question 5. Would you read another book by this author? And I definitely would read another book by this author. The feeling of intrigue was really interesting, and I looked him up on Goodreads, and it looks like he has a lot of kind of like thriller, espionage, alternate history, or history-style stories. So I'm definitely going to keep an eye out for those and see what I can do, because I really enjoyed the setting in this, and if he can execute some of the characters better, I could see this guy becoming one of my favorite authors. And then question 6, does this book remind you of another book? And it actually kind of reminded me of 2 books, just with different aspects of this book being in both of those. The first one is The Test by Sylvain Neuvel. The Test is more kind of futuristic, but it's like still alternate timeline Britain. And the things that overlapped for me in the 2 books was just like the sense that the main character is being played by a government or a greater big or a system, and the overall idea that like the potential for harm is forcing a male protagonist to act outside his comfort zone is another aspect. So not super similar, but like general tone is a little bit similar, and I think there's a possibility you will like The Test if you liked this book. And then the other one is The Trespasser by Tana French. Here, the feeling is, the overlap is more, they're both detective inspectors for the murder squad in Scotland Yard. And the main character, during the course of an investigation, is really getting a sense of unreality. They don't know if they're being played, they don't know who's telling the truth, they're overanalyzing every interaction with every person they come in contact with. There's issues with the investigation, there's issues with evidence. And although that one is more contemporary rather than alternate history, just the overall situation for the detective inspectors is very similar. And that's all I have for the book questions. Hopefully if you like this book, you might at least take a look into the other 2 books that it reminds me of, because I do recommend them. They were both very good. And with that, I'll move into the spoiler chat. And I'm going to start with Barbara Barca. Holy hell did I hate her. Well, not her. I thought she as a character was really interesting. The romance, not so much. It could have just stayed espionage-related flirtations, or platonic working against a greater evil, combining forces. But they had to make it love, and it was just so poorly written in terms of how their relationship developed. It just kind of happened, and I didn't believe it or feel invested in it. I don't even know how invested he was in it, because when she dies, he like falls apart, and they're like, no, pull yourself together. And then he just magically pulls himself together? Come on, if you really love the person, I feel like you wouldn't just be able to magically pull yourself together like that. I mean, who knows? Some people can compartmentalize way better than me, but I would be inconsolable and like on the ground in the fetal position if my fiance died. Like, come on guys. I didn't believe the emotion between the 2 of them is what it really comes down to. Next, I'm going to kind of rave about the ending a little bit. Like I said, I loved that you just have this natural resolution with the resistance, and that you have this just brilliant, like breathtakingly brilliant external manipulation for not necessarily just for self-gain and self-preservation, but with the face of greater good. Like, oh, it was just beautifully, it just intermingled beautifully and just tied up all of the loose ends, but still providing resolution that none of, like 99% of the characters weren't happy with. Like, I just loved it, because it's just like, oh, everything's resolved. I mean, nobody really cares for how it happened, but what can they say? There's no loose ends, there's nobody to take care of, everything was dealt with, and I love that kind of resolution. And then I'll just kind of end on how much I enjoyed the overall tone of intrigue and espionage. I really loved that it played out with a lot of the character interactions, although I didn't care for some of the conversations because I found them very stilted. Like, they felt overly scripted. And again, that could have just been because of the espionage, but I loved the way Douglas Archer would talk to these people, and he would come out of a conversation and be like, I believe them, and then talk to one other person and be like, who's telling the truth? Because I believe this guy, because he sounds like he believes what he's saying, and this person believes what they're saying, and I'm not getting all the information. How do I get these people to tell me more information? And just those constant waves of like perception and trying to read people, even though they all come off as unreadable, was just really, really interesting. And I love the way it supported resistance groups and spy networks. It was just brilliant. And I just love that everybody fell into this. Like, even Archer himself fell into this because he was trying to get more information without giving away too much. Just the whole playing the cards close to the chest I really enjoyed. And even though I did enjoy a lot of the things here, like I've mentioned in the spoilery chat, the overall main character and pacing just really pulled me out of the rest of the book, so I can't really give it a higher mark in terms of my overall enjoyment. And that's just, in my opinion, how the book kind of reads. With this, I will see you guys in the next video. Comment below if you want to tell me what you think or have any issue with what I say or think I missed something important. Let me know. I check it pretty regularly. And with that, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!